Transatlantic slave trade necessitated the creation of structures that have now become monuments of historical significance to Ghana. From castles and forts to hidden underground tunnels, these infrastructures serve as a stark reminder of the agony endured by our ancestors. As we mark Heritage Month, ChannelOne News' Fauzuma Saudu explores the untold stories of the hidden slave tunnels in Jamestown and other trading points in the then Gold Coast.
The transatlantic slave trade, which spanned 4 centuries, was largely facilitated by European powers through infrastructure development aimed at efficiently acquiring enslaved Africans. From fortified trading posts along the coast to inland transportation networks designed to expedite the capture and movement of slaves, these facilities have become monuments of historical significance in Ghana.
It's a no-brainer to mention castles and forts in any conversation about the transatlantic slave trade. But did you ever hear of lodges? Today I'm here at the Nee Hansen Mall in Jamestown to tell the story of how some of these slaves were transported through tunnels.
Master Hansen, as he was affectionately called, was a Danish slave merchant who operated in British-controlled Jamestown, Accra during the transatlantic slave trade. He also served as the governor of James Fort. Nejasi Hansen, a 4th-generation descendant of Master Hansen, was my first point of contact when I visited what used to be his ancestors' slave lodge.
Hansen is a Danish man and trade with the Danish, and also after the Danish went, he also with the British because he deal with ammunitions and he's also trading just in slave trade too, and he has settled already and also married with black people. So he has the Dutch have to left. He doesn't want. He has his own house and with his people living.
Faced with resistance from families of enslaved people and sporadic uprising by locals, merchants like Hansen resorted to constructing underground tunnels beneath their lodges to secretly transport captives.
The house was basically his lodge where he kept his slaves and also take them out, and that is how come he was able to put up his own tunnel that links to the fort, so that at least when he's doing his trade, he knows that, okay, if I'm in the fort and I have 50 people in here, they will just walk down the... Yeah, 50, if I say 50...
Yeah, slaves, yes.
Definitely, they are slaves.
Yes. Well, this square-like structure you are seeing is an entry point to one of the many tunnels that connected to the James Fort. Well, clearly in your shot, it's been blocked so many years ago, and, after the slave trade was abolished, and this was because of plans by successive governments to make way for proper housing projects and whatnot.
As a major trading hub for enslaved people, tunnels were common at lodges and forts. Just a short distance from the Nee Hansen Lodge, I visited the only slave tunnel in Jamestown that remains unblocked. But before entering, I got a glimpse of another significant structure, the documentation office, where ships were registered for the transportation of enslaved Africans.
And this building is also a very important one as well. So Elder Dempster was a shipping line, so they do most of the shipping transactions. It got to a point the British wanted to opt out because they thought business was not brisk anymore because the slave trade had been abolished. But some individual merchants decided that no, you can't opt out. This is the best place to be. And they wanted to expand their infrastructure in terms of telegraph lines. So those private individuals paid part of the construction of the telegraph lines, and that is how come telegraph was laid into this particular structure, and then they did all the telegraph communication from here.
The Jamestown Sports Arena today is a hub for nurturing talent in a stark contrast to its grim past.
Some 400 years ago, there was a trading activity in Africa, not for goods, services, but for humans. The slave trade presented a torturous experience. This happens to be one of the slave tunnels in Jamestown, Accra, where some of these slaves were transported through to the James Fort.
For at least 3 months, enslaved Africans were kept in these tunnels, shackled and malnourished, before being transferred to James Fort. Although the distance from the tunnels to the fort is only between 500 and 700 meters, the journey took nearly 2 hours due to the difficulty of moving in chains.
Sometimes what is being said is that when they want to punish those who are too strong, they will bring them here to punish them before the ships arrives. But they will use it to do the salting and make sure everybody is taken out. Anytime I go to the Cape Coast Castle and say 300 people were kept here, and you look at the ventilation, you could tell that if 300 people are in that same room as we are standing here, the heat that you will face is too much. But that's the reality of the day.
I'm clearly bathing in sweat right now, and I can only imagine, the extent of torture these slaves were subjected to.
Curious about why the inner access to the tunnel was blocked, I sought answers from Nimama, who explained that the blockage was necessitated by the continued illegal slave trade even after its abolishment. Merchants who still had enslaved people in their possession resorted to using these tunnels in secrecy.
Is this where we end, or there is a journey ahead?
This is where we end, because what happened was that all these places were sealed at a point, because what happened was that the slave merchants were still doing the trade after the abolition of the slave trade, because
so they're trading illegally.
So they have to seal most of these places for them not to do it.
The tragedy of enslaved Africans in Jamestown is just one chapter in a broader history reflected in other coastal trading centers like Fort Williams in Anamabo Central Region.
With the male dungeon, they were keeping about 100 to 150 slaves. And then with the female dungeon, 200 to 250. And then with the concubine dungeon, that would depend on the number of women that are beautiful among the women slaves. For out of 466 slaves that were brought to Fort, 66,000 slaves that were brought to Fort William, we were able to ship 381,000 from Fort William to the Caribbean.
Back in Jamestown, slave masters had their own strategy for luring captives into the tunnels.
We have one of the lodges called the Franklin Lodge. There's one tunnel there as well that was created in the kitchen.
Wow.
So if you are a slave that you have been captured, and I always say that if you smell good food and you think that you are going to have some lunch or dinner, you are just going to end up in the ship.
The transatlantic slave trade may be over, but the stories of brutality, many etched on the very walls of these tunnels, remain largely untold.
These dark and deep pits, guised in the names of tunnel, still echo the toil and cry of ancestors. As we celebrate our Heritage Month, this should be a sober reflection of how far we have come as a people. Reporting from the slave tunnel in Jamestown, Accra, I am Fauzu Masaudu for Channel One News.